The Galactic Council had repeatedly warned alien races to fear the ruthless tenacity of humans in war, but the Nausicans invaded the peaceful planet Zephyria anyway, not realizing their fatal mistake until it was far too late. In the cavernous, dimly lit council chambers, towering alien representatives from countless races loomed over the comparatively tiny and battle-scarred human veteran Thomas Lewis. The council's tentacled leader addressed him. "The Nausicans strip Zephyria of resources and enslave its inhabitants as we speak. We warned them about your kind, human, of your cunning, your sheer ruthlessness. They did not listen." Its bioluminescent eyes bore into Thomas. "Ancient treaties prevent us from intervening directly, but you can, human. Travel to Zephyria. Drive the Nausicans out by any means necessary. We require a human touch." Thomas grinned, scars twisting. The council needed him to teach the Nausicans to fear humanity, or they'd keep preying on the defenseless. As he turned to leave, the leader called, "Kraxon, the vicious and proud Nausican warlord, leads them. Give him reason to fear you." Thomas glanced back, eyes glinting dangerously in the low light. "I'll give him a whole planet of reasons." The fate of the Zephyrians and the Council's authority hung in the balance. If Thomas failed, the Nausicans' cruelty would spread unchecked. Everything depended on him, reminding the galaxy why they should heed the Council's warnings and fear humanity's wrath. He could not, would not, fail. As Thomas stepped into the freighter, the metal plates clanked beneath his feet. The interior was dimly lit with exposed wiring and power conduits snaking across the walls. He eased into the pilot's chair, the leather creaking as he settled in. He tapped a sequence into the control panel, and the ship hummed to life, its engines rumbling through the hull. On the view screen, a holographic display flickered, detailing the intelligence reports on Kraxon and his forces. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he skimmed the data. Kraxon's flagship, a massive Nausicaan warship, hung in orbit around Zephyria like a bird of prey. Countless fighters swarmed around it, ready to strike at a moment's notice. On the planet's surface, legions of Nausicaan soldiers patrolled the slave camps. Plasma rifles at the ready, the captive Zephyrians toiled under the sweltering sun, their spirits broken. "Shit," Thomas muttered, his jaw clenching. He was just one man against an army. But he had faced worse odds before and come out on top. He wouldn't let the Zephyrians down, not when the Council was counting on him. He opened a secure channel, the static crackling as the connection stabilized. "Broker, it's me." The shadowy figure on the other end chuckled, his voice distorted by the encryption. "Thomas, I thought I might be hearing from you. I need an edge against the Nausicans, something they won't expect." "I have just the thing," the broker replied, his tone laced with amusement. "Sending the coordinates now, but it won't be cheap." Thomas glanced at the credit transfer amount and winced. He tapped in his authorization code, watching as the funds vanished from his account. It never is. The console beeped, signaling the arrival of the coordinates. Thomas plugged them in and the nav computer whirred, calculating the jump. He gripped the control yoke, his knuckles whitening, and engaged the hyperdrive. The stars outside the viewport stretched into infinite lines as the ship leaped into the void. Hours later, the freighter dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of a lawless sector. A dilapidated space station hung in the void, its hull pitted with scorch marks and makeshift repairs. Thomas guided the ship into one of the docking bays, the magnetic clamps locking onto the hull with a resounding clang. He made his way through the station's dingy corridors, ignoring the suspicious glares from the other denizens. He found the broker's contact in a seedy bar, nursing a glowing blue drink. After a terse exchange and another transfer of credits, Thomas left with a small innocuous device, a prototype cloaking generator capable of rendering his ship invisible to sensors. He also secured a cache of EMP grenades, each one powerful enough to fry electronics and leave enemies helpless. Back aboard his freighter, Thomas installed the cloaking device, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship shimmered and vanished from view, the stars visible through its transparent hull. Satisfied, he plotted a course for Zephyria and engaged the hyperdrive once more. The ship emerged from hyperspace on the far side of Zephyria, the Nausicaan blockade visible in the distance. Thomas activated the cloak, and the freighter slipped past the enemy ships unseen. He angled toward the planet's surface, aiming for a remote jungle region far from Kraxon's main base. As the ship touched down, the humid air rushed into the cargo bay. Thomas stepped out into the oppressive heat, his skin already slick with sweat. He could hear the distant screams of the Zephyrian slaves, their agony carried on the wind. Kraxon's cruelty knew no bounds. Thomas checked his weapons, a pulse rifle, a plasma pistol, and a razor-sharp vibroblade. He had no illusions about engaging the Nausicans in open combat. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he had other methods. The jungle would be his ally, the shadows his cover. He would strike hard and fast, fading away before the enemy could react. He set off into the undergrowth, his footsteps muffled by the dense foliage. The Nausicans' sensor array was his first target. Without it, they would be blind to his movements. An EMP grenade would reduce it to slag, giving him the freedom to operate undetected. From there he would begin his campaign of sabotage and liberation, freeing Zephyrian slaves and destroying Kraxon's assets. He would hit the Nausicans where they least expected it, eroding their grip on the planet bit by bit, and when the time was right, he would confront Kraxon himself, teaching the warlord the true meaning of fear. The jungle closed in around Thomas as he pushed deeper into the wilderness, the sounds of the enslaved Zephyrians spurring him onward. The Nausicans would soon learn what it meant to be hunted by a human, and they would regret ever setting foot on Zephyria. Days turned into weeks as Thomas waged his one-man war against the Nausicans. His hit-and-run tactics, combined with his cloaking device, allowed him to strike at Kraxon's forces with impunity. Supply depots exploded in the night, slave pens were cracked open, and patrols vanished into the jungle, never to be seen again. Kraxon's fury knew no bounds. He raged at his subordinates, demanding they bring him the head of this mysterious assailant. Patrols were doubled, then tripled, but to no avail. Thomas was always one step ahead, his intimate knowledge of the terrain and his advanced technology keeping him safe. One night, after dispatching a particularly heavily armed patrol, Thomas managed to capture a Nausicaan soldier. He dragged the hulking alien back to his hidden camp and began his interrogation. "Where is Kraxon hiding?" Thomas demanded, his vibroblade hovering inches from the soldier's throat. "What is he planning?" The soldier, initially defiant, began to break under Thomas's relentless questioning. He spoke of a secret underground base deep in the jungle, where Kraxon was conducting horrific experiments on the Zephyrians. "He's trying to unlock the secrets of their psychic powers," the soldier babbled. "He thinks he can use them as weapons." Thomas's blood ran cold. He knew he had to act fast. Leaving the soldier tied up, he set off into the night, his cloaking device shimmering around him. The base was well hidden, but Thomas's keen eyes picked out the telltale signs of activity. Guards patrolled the perimeter, plasma rifles at the ready. Thomas waited for a gap in their movements, then darted forward, placing an EMP grenade on the control panel of the blast doors. The grenade detonated with a flash of blue light, and the doors slid open, their locking mechanisms fried. Thomas slipped inside, his rifle raised. The sight that greeted him turned his stomach. Row upon row of Zephyrians hooked up to grotesque machines, their minds being probed and twisted. Some were little more than husks, their psyches shattered beyond repair. Thomas moved from one to the next, ripping out tubes and wires, freeing the prisoners. Many were too weak to stand, let alone walk. Thomas gritted his teeth, knowing he couldn't leave them behind. He herded the Zephyrians towards the ventilation system, boosting them up one by one into the large ducts. Just as the last one disappeared into the vents, alarms began to blare throughout the complex. "Go," Thomas urged the Zephyrians. "Get to the jungle, I'll hold them off." He turned to face the oncoming horde of Nausicaan soldiers, his rifle spitting plasma. They fell before him, but more took their place, a seemingly endless tide of fanatic warriors. Thomas fought like a man possessed, his vibroblade slicing through armor and flesh alike. His rifle grew hot in his hands, its power cell dwindling with each shot. Still, he fought on, buying time for the Zephyrians to escape. A plasma bolt struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Another scored across his thigh. His armor absorbed most of the energy, but he could feel the heat, the pain. He stumbled, his vision blurring. The Nausicans closed in, their weapons leveled at his head. Thomas braced himself for the end. But it never came. Instead, a massive explosion rocked the base, sending soldiers flying. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the lights flickered and died. Thomas, seizing his chance, leapt for a Nausicaan dropship parked in the hangar. He sealed the hatch behind him and fired up the engines, engaging the cloaking device. As he blasted out of the hangar, he saw the base erupt in a chain of secondary explosions. The Zephyrians, it seemed, had used their psionic powers to overload the base's power core. Thomas allowed himself a grim smile as he aimed the dropship towards the stars. In orbit, he could see the Nausicaan fleet in disarray, ships milling about in confusion. At the center of the chaos was Kraxon's warship, a monstrous vessel bristling with weapons. Thomas guided his cloaked dropship towards it, his heart pounding in his chest. It was time for a reckoning. As Thomas crept through the bowels of Kraxon's warship, the stolen Nausicaan armor chafed against his skin. The corridors were dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of sweat and fear. Nausicaan crew members strode past, oblivious to the human intruder in their midst. Thomas's heart pounded as he approached the central computer core. The door hissed open, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with pulsing circuitry and humming data banks. He pulled out the device the broker had given him, a sleek black cube that thrummed with hidden power. He jacked it into the mainframe, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. Data streamed across the screen, and Thomas's eyes widened as he realized the true extent of Kraxon's ambitions. The warlord wasn't just after Zephyria's resources, he was building a psionic amplifier, a machine that could boost the Zephyrians' mental powers to unimaginable levels. With it, Kraxon could control minds across the galaxy, bending entire civilizations to his will. Thomas gritted his teeth. He couldn't let that happen. He tapped a command and a virus began to spread through the ship's systems, worming its way into the weapons and engines. At a critical moment, it would shut them down, leaving Kraxon vulnerable. But Thomas wasn't done yet. He still had to face the warlord himself. He made his way to the bridge, the corridors now empty as klaxons blared and crew members rushed to their battle stations. The doors to the bridge exploded inward, and Thomas stormed through, his pulse rifle leveled at the towering figure of Kraxon. "It's over, Kraxon," Thomas shouted over the din of alarms. "Surrender now and I might let you live." Kraxon spun, his four eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing in rage. His hand shot to his sidearm, a massive plasma pistol. "You dare challenge me on my own ship, human?" The Nausicaan fired, a bolt of searing energy streaking towards Thomas, but the human was already moving, diving behind a sparking console as the shot scorched the bulkhead behind him. Thomas popped up, his rifle spitting plasma. Kraxon ducked, the shot sizzling over his head. The warlord returned fire, his pistol sending a barrage of bolts towards Thomas's position. The bridge descended into chaos, consoles exploding and crew members diving for cover as the two warriors dueled. Thomas used every trick he knew, leveraging his agility and human ingenuity to outmaneuver the physically imposing Kraxon. He vaulted over a railing, rolled under a burst of plasma and came up firing. His shots hit home and Kraxon roared in pain as his weapon spun away, blown from his grip. But the Nausicaan wasn't done. Bleeding from a dozen wounds, he charged at Thomas, his massive fist swinging. Thomas met him head-on, blocking and parrying, using the warlord's own momentum against him. They grappled across the bridge, smashing through consoles and sending sparks flying. Kraxon's strength was immense, but Thomas's skill and determination matched it. The tide of battle seesawed back and forth, neither warrior able to gain the upper hand, until with a sudden flicker the ship's lights dimmed, consoles went dark, and the deck shuddered beneath their feet. Thomas's virus had taken hold. In that moment of distraction, Craxon's grip loosened. Thomas seized the opportunity, delivering a devastating blow to the warlord's head. Craxon staggered, his eyes glazing, then collapsed to the deck with a resounding crash. Thomas stood over him, chest heaving, his rifle trained on the unconscious Nausicaan. But there was no time to rest. He still had to deal with the psionic amplifier. He raced through the corridors, following the schematics he'd memorized. The amplifier was a monstrosity of technology, a pulsing, glowing core surrounded by intricate circuitry. Thomas knew it was too dangerous to let it survive. He accessed the ship's self-destruct protocols, setting them to trigger in a matter of minutes. Alarms blared anew as he sprinted for the hangar bay, plasma bolts from the few remaining Nausicaan guards sizzling past him. He leaped into his stolen dropship, its engines roaring to life. The hangar doors slammed shut behind him, but Thomas blasted them open with a missile, the explosion consuming a handful of pursuing fighters. Then he was out, the dropship streaking away from Craxon's flagship. Behind him, the warship exploded in a blinding flash of light, the psionic amplifier and the Nausicaan warlord consumed in the inferno. As debris pelted his shields, Thomas allowed himself a grim smile. Zephyria was free. The Nausicaan threat was diminished. The galaxy, for a moment, was a safer place. But he couldn't rest on his laurels. There would always be another threat, another tyrant seeking to impose their will on the defenseless. And when that day came, Thomas would be ready. Humanity would be ready. The stars stretched out before him, an endless expanse of possibilities and dangers. Thomas leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His work was far from over. As the debris of Craxon's shattered warship spun lazily against the starfield, Thomas guided his battered dropship back towards the galactic core. His body ached, the adrenaline of battle fading, leaving only exhaustion and the dull throb of his wounds. The towering spires of the Galactic Council's headquarters loomed before him as he set the dropship down on the landing pad. He limped down the ramp, his hand pressed against his side, feeling the sticky warmth of blood seeping through his fingers. The council chambers were a cacophony of voices as Thomas entered, the various alien representatives shouting over each other. But as they caught sight of him, a hush fell over the room. Thomas Lewis, the councillor at the head of the table, said, rising to his feet, "You have done the impossible. Craxon is dead, his warship destroyed. The Nausicaan threat has been quelled." Thomas shook his head, wincing at the effort. "For now," he said, his voice rough with fatigue, "but they'll be back. They always come back." The councillor's eyes widened. "You mean—" "I mean this fight isn't over," Thomas said. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each councillor in turn. "It's just beginning." The councillors erupted into a frenzy of chatter, but the head councillor raised his hand for silence. He turned to Thomas, his expression grave. "We cannot ask more of you, Thomas Lewis," he said. "You have given enough, more than enough. We offer you a place among us, a voice in shaping the future of the galaxy." Thomas barked a laugh, then grimaced as pain lanced through his chest. "With all due respect," he said, "I'm a soldier, not a politician. My place is out there, fighting for those who can't fight for themselves." He turned to leave, his steps heavy on the polished floor. But before he could reach the door, it burst open, a breathless messenger stumbling through. "Councillors," the messenger gasped. "Urgent news from the Antares sector. The Nausicaans, they've launched an attack on the human colony there. Thousands are dead. The colony is in ruins." Thomas felt his blood run cold, his fists clenched at his sides, the knuckles white. "Who leads them?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. The messenger swallowed hard. "A new warlord," he said. "Even more ruthless than Craxon. They call him Jarok." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, memories of fallen comrades, of burning worlds flashing through his mind. When he opened them again, they were hard as steel. I'm going to need a team, he said.
They
gathered in the war room of Thomas's ship, a Zephyrian, her eyes glowing with psionic energy, a Krelian, his sniper rifle slung over his shoulder, a Vaxian, her fingers dancing over a holographic keyboard, and a Queltorian, a bandolier of explosives strapped across his chest. Thomas stood before them, a star map glowing behind him, red dots marking Nausicaan strongholds. The Nausicans think they've broken us, he said. They think that by striking at our colonies, they can make us cower in fear. They're wrong. He tapped a control, and the map zoomed in on a particular system. We're going to take the fight to them. We'll hit their supply lines, their command centers, their shipyards. We'll make them regret ever setting foot on a human world. The team nodded, grim determination etched on their faces. But make no mistake, Thomas continued, this will be a war unlike any other. The Nausicans will throw everything they have at us. Some of us may not make it back. He met each of their gazes in turn. If any of you wish to walk away, do it now. There will be no shame in it. But no one moved. They stood with him, ready to face whatever horrors the galaxy had in store. Thomas nodded, pride swelling in his chest. Then let's get to work. The war was brutal, unrelenting. Thomas and his team struck deep into Nausicaan territory, always one step ahead thanks to the Zephyrians' precognitive abilities and the Vaxians' unparalleled skill at hacking enemy systems. They sabotaged warships in dry dock, sent munitions depots up in flames, assassinated high-ranking Nausicaan generals, but for every victory, the Nausicans seemed to grow stronger, more determined. In the heart of the Nausicaan homeworld, in a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy, Thomas led his team in a desperate final assault. They fought through waves of elite warriors, the ground beneath their feet slick with blood, both human and Nausicaan. One by one, Thomas's team fell, the Krelian picked off by a Nausicaan sniper, the Queltorian sacrificing himself to breach the doors to the central command bunker. In the end, only Thomas and the Zephyrian remained, standing back to back amidst a ring of Nausicaan corpses, their weapons empty, their armor shattered. And before them Jarok himself, a monster of a Nausicaan wielding a plasma cannon in each hand. So you have fought well, human, Jarok sneered, but it ends here. With your death your species will lose all hope. They will see the futility of resistance. Thomas spat blood, raised his fists. You don't know humanity very well, then. He charged, a wordless battle cry on his lips, the Zephyrian at his side. Plasma bolts seared the air around them, but they pushed forward, closing the distance. Thomas felt the searing heat of a plasma bolt as it punched through his armor, felt his flesh burn, but he didn't falter, didn't slow. With a final desperate lunge, he tackled Jarok, bearing the warlord to the ground. They grappled, Thomas's vision blurring, his strength fading with each passing second. But he held on, even as Jarok's claws raked his flesh, even as the edges of his vision darkened. And then, with a burst of psionic energy, the Zephyrian was there, her hand outstretched, her eyes blazing with power. Jarok convulsed, his mouth open in a silent scream as the Zephyrian tore through his mind, ripping out every secret, every plan. And then it was over. Jarok lay still, his four eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. Around them, the remaining Nausicans threw down their weapons, their will to fight extinguished with their leader's death. Thomas tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. He slumped back, feeling the warmth of his own blood pooling beneath him. The Zephyrian knelt at his side, tears streaking her face. "Hold on," she whispered. "Help is coming." But Thomas shook his head. "No," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. "This is how it ends for me." With a shaking hand, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small beacon. He pressed it into the Zephyrian's hand. "Take this," he said. "Get it to the Council. Let them know we won. That humanity will always stand against the darkness." The Zephyrian nodded, her grip tightening on the beacon. I will, I promise." Thomas smiled then, even as his vision faded, as the last of his strength ebbed away. His final thoughts were of Earth, of rolling green hills and blue skies, of a humanity free from the fear of annihilation, free to reach for the stars. "Remember us," he whispered. And then Thomas Lewis, the man who had saved the galaxy not once but twice, breathed his last. His story would pass into legend, told and retold across 1,000 worlds. A statue would be raised in his honor on the grounds of the Galactic Council, a towering monument to a man who had given everything for the sake of others. And whenever the forces of tyranny and oppression reared their heads, whenever the innocent cried out for a savior, there would always be those who remembered the name Thomas Lewis and the sacrifices he made. For he was human, and to be human was to stand, to fight no matter the odds. To be human was to be the light in the darkness, the hope in the face of despair. Thomas Lewis had shown the galaxy the true strength of humanity, and that was a lesson that would never be forgotten. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.